international sports activities are probably the single best, most fun, most effective convening mechanisms to talk not just about sports, but also to talk about diplomacy, to talk about development.
One of the things that's great about sports is it breaks down barriers. Then it's a little bit easier to expose young men and women to the values of America.
We are the longest standing partner of the Olympic Games, starting almost 100 years ago with the Games in Amsterdam in 1928. When it comes to American values, we think globally but act locally.
That's the soft power we're talking about and how diplomacy can change the world using sports.
This decade, we're going to see several large sporting events. We were talking about this backstage, hosted across America. The inaugural CONCACAF Women's Gold Cup, and I did have to look that up, how to pronounce it. The 2026 World Cup across North America, and again, the Summer Olympics in Los Angeles in 2028. These events uniquely convene individuals and countries and cultures, and they provide a powerful public diplomacy opportunity. Congresswoman, your home city will host a number of these matches, as well as the Summer Olympics. As we prepare to open our doors to meet these different cultures and countries, what does it mean for Americans to connect with the international delegations and showcase the best of America at major events that millions of people will be watching?
Well, first, I just want to say thank you for the invitation. It takes a lot to get me here before votes, but I thought this was a very important discussion to have. Sydney Kamlager-Dove representing the 37th Congressional District. So we will be hosting those events as well as the All-Star Game and the Super Bowl. And those will actually be happening all by 2028. So I have the utmost confidence that not only will Los Angeles be able to open its doors and receive the millions of folks that are going to be coming to Los Angeles and then traveling throughout the state, because we have amazing assets across the state of California, but it's also going to be an opportunity for us to engage with the international community with the expertise that we have in Los Angeles. If it's about innovation, if it's about healthcare, if it's about tech, if it's about arts and culture, whatever you are thinking you are interested in, VC, entrepreneurialism, it is happening in Los Angeles. And I think that sports and international sports activities are probably the single best, most fun, most effective convening mechanisms to talk not just about sports, but also to talk about diplomacy, to talk about development, to talk about cultural exchange, and to bridge cultural gaps. And I think at a time when folks are feeling isolated more than ever before, the importance of sports cannot be overstated.
Well, building on that, Dan, in a moment where there is such isolationism and polarization and distrust between and within societies, how do you envision these global sporting events to bring life into and advance America's diplomatic efforts?
Well, echoing the Congresswoman, it's great to be here. Thanks for hosting such a wonderful event. I would say it's not just through 2028. We've got what we're calling a mega decade of sporting events happening here in the United States. Actually started 2 days ago with the Cricket World Cup in Dallas, the CONCACAF Women's Gold Cup, and it ends with what we think is going to be the Winter Olympic and Paralympic Games in Salt Lake City. And we don't have those quite yet, so knock on some wood, but I think we feel fairly confident in winning those games. And what that gives us is a full decade, an opportunity that we've never had before, to really look at sports as a vehicle to nurture social inclusion, gender equality, and tackle some of the tougher conversations that sometimes we tiptoe around. And what's great about these games for the next 10 years is they're gonna bring tens of millions of visitors to the United States. Billions of eyes are gonna be on the United States. So we have an opportunity to have some of those more difficult conversations while those games are happening here.
Well, I don't know if you guys notice how tall I'm trying to sit up right now, Stephen. I feel like we're about the same height right here. But you're talking about all eyes on sports. And Stephen, you have traveled to Indonesia, and you're traveling to Indonesia this week, right?
No, I was there last year. I'm going to Sri Lanka.
Oh, Sri Lanka this week. Yes, excuse me. And you're a sports envoy speaking to the benefits of playing sports across borders and continents. So first, what motivated you to become a sports envoy? And can you tell us a little bit about the role? What does it mean? And how does that contribute to peace building in these countries?
Well, I guess first, as far as what motivated me to be a sports envoy, when you get asked to represent your country globally, for me, it was one of the greatest honors ever to be bestowed upon me. So I was honored just to be asked, and something that I enjoy doing. I'm a child of educators, and so for me to have the ability to travel across the globe and to teach young men and women the sports that I love, and one of the things that's great about sports is it breaks down barriers, and it forces you to really leave your comfort zone. And once we get these young men and women outside of their comfort zone, then it's a little bit easier to expose them to the values of America and things that we want to espouse as far as gender equality, equity for all stakeholders, competition, fairness, empathy and compassion, and being able to do that and bring those American values while teaching the game that I love. It's what better thing for me to do?
I think it's a wonderful thing for you to do. So speaking of American values and American culture, Jim, I want to turn to you. Coca-Cola is a global brand. It's one of the most recognized brands worldwide. It reaches to nearly every country. I shared as I was researching this, I came across the video, I'd like to buy the world a Coke. But it's also a force for good, as your supply chain served to distribute vaccines during COVID and pandemic. You espouse water stewardship. So how does Coca-Cola and America's businesses contribute to our soft power and our global public diplomacy efforts? And can you provide some examples of how the brand promotes American values?
Sure. Well, thank you, Dana, and to Liz for having me on the panel today. Let me just give you a statistic about who the Coca-Cola Company is. We are 700,000 people in 950 facilities in over 200 countries. We are the longest standing partner, to the importance of sports in diplomacy. We are the longest standing partner of the Olympic Games, starting almost 100 years ago with the Games in Amsterdam in 1928. We are one of the first sponsors of FIFA, starting in the early 1970s. So Coca-Cola has really understood the importance, and if you go to any sort of big game in any country, whatever that game is, whatever that sport is, you're likely to see a Coca-Cola sponsorship there. So we've always seen the connection between sports and our company. And we also, going back to that old phrase, when it comes to American values, we think globally but act locally. Of those 700,000 people that are in the Coca-Cola system worldwide, some of them work for over 250 bottlers in this country, in this world. In the United States, that's 64 bottlers, and many of these businesses are family-run for generations, and we see that across the countries, across the world. So we spend a lot of time with those bottlers and the U.S. government, nonprofit groups in a variety of countries, working on ways to improve the living conditions and situations for people across the globe. I'll give you one example, and that's our work with USAID and the Gates Foundation on Project Last Mile. If you think about the Coca-Cola Company, we are essentially a large marketing company, right? We are making fantastic products that fit the needs of the people in each of the countries that we do our business in. But we're marketing experts, we're supply chain and logistics experts, and have a general sense after 138 years of how to make things work in the most efficient way. So Project Last Mile is an opportunity for us to use our supply chain and our business know-how to help improve and strengthen the health systems in a number of countries in Africa. These are bespoke programs that are created oftentimes in conjunction with the governments in those countries and the US government and nonprofit groups to make sure that medicines can get to where they need to be in hospitals across Africa. And that's a super way of sending the message of American values. It's a great way to get the needed medicines to the people who need them. 50% of people in Africa lack access to the medicines that they need. So it's similar to the way the fellow from John Deere in an earlier panel talked about how they think of this. We really think of the things we can do to improve the situations in the various places that we work in from a strategic way. Project Last Mile is an example of that. It's also an example of how we can bring the tremendous power of an iconic American brand to meet the needs of people every day.
Fantastic. And I'd like to buy the world a Coke. Congresswoman, over your first term in Congress, you've been a champion of America's public diplomacy, including introducing the Young African Leaders Initiative Act, or YALI, to further boost the State Department's efforts to engage with young people across the African continent. What does public diplomacy mean to you, and why should public diplomacy programs like YALI be an integral part of America's broader engagement?
So I don't know about you all, but when you think about the State Department, you do kind of think about very dull bureaucrats that don't seem like they're very, I know, exactly, that don't seem like they're able to meet you where you are.
Not talking about you.
Not talking about you. No, because we're both wearing jimmies, so I know he's hip. But when you think about the State Department, you think about very heady issues, and you're not thinking about things fun like arts and culture and sports. What's so interesting is that those things are the points of easiest access for folks. I might have my guard up as someone from another country when you're talking about public policy, but I'm certainly going to start smiling and getting more animated when you're talking about your favorite athlete, or when you're talking about a favorite moment in sports history, or when you're talking about a favorite movie. And so that's sort of how I approach the role of public diplomacy, because it allows the public sector, the private sector, NGOs, civil society, and everyday folks to participate in those discussions. I'm really focused on Africa because the United States, quite frankly, should be focused on Africa. It is the fastest growing continent. 70% of the population is under the age of 30. It has the largest amount of minerals and natural resources, and we have got to figure out a way to develop supportive, dignified, meaningful partnerships with countries across Africa in ways that are not exploitive, but that are celebratory. YALI, the Young African Leaders Act, I think is a great example. I introduced the bill in 2023. I think it is the single most important and largest public diplomacy contribution between the United States with the continent of Africa. There are two segments. One is the Regional Leadership Center, where we have young African folks come here and they're working with USAID and they're working with the private sector, and they're taking that information back with them to their countries. And then there's the Mandela Fellowship, where we have young folks ages 25 to 35 that are coming here for 6 weeks. They're going to our universities, and they are also involved in exchange. The idea is, if you're investing in Africa's future, if you're investing in Africa's young folk, then that will be able to, sort of reap dividends in terms of cultural exchange, in terms of diplomacy, in terms of people-to-people relationships, and then real discussions around innovation, development, entrepreneurialism, et cetera. I've traveled to the continent quite a few times, and regardless of where folks are at, invariably they say, we love the values of the United States. We love the expertise that you all have. We love your ability to support development and infrastructure. How do we do that? And then eventually that conversation moves to spaces about sports or culture or fashion, entertainment, and then healthcare, and then, building roads. And so I think we should not sleep on the soft diplomacy that comes from sports, and arts and culture, because it can really allow us to bridge gaps that, we might not have been able to do in the past.
Thank you for that, and thank you for your support of YALI. I had the pleasure of meeting several YALI fellows in Africa last May. So, Stephen, I'm gonna turn to you. Noted basketball lover President Obama said basketball can be about a lot more than what happens on the court. And he said this when the Basketball Africa League was launched in 2019. And that's a partnership between the NBA and the International Basketball Federation. Basketball Africa League features 12 teams from 12 African countries, and they will play 48 games across South Africa and Egypt, Senegal, and Rwanda this year. As a former professional basketball player, you guys picked up on that, right? He's a former professional basketball player. How can communication and negotiation on the basketball court translate to how we engage in global diplomacy?
Well, first, as a former professional basketball player, my former teammates are probably going to kill me because you got the senator and Dan over here, sporting the fresh kicks, and I have the, the regular shoes on. I would be the one normally to do that. So, little juxtaposition here. But one thing that, is universal about sports is it is a universal language, and it is one that everybody speaks. And fortunately for America, we are more versed at it than most because we're the best internationally than other countries. You can go to any basketball court or soccer pitch around the globe, roll out a ball, and you don't need Google Translate because everybody just plays the sport. We could do a little experiment. We're gonna split this side. There's a soccer ball over there, and we could just go at it, and everybody would just have fun, play sports, and you break down those barriers. But when it comes to basketball, and I know this personally, I played 11 years in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, 4 in the NBA, and regardless of where I was at, there was one constant theme that once practice started or once we started playing in a game, there was no need and there was no communication barriers because we just were out there playing. And regardless of who I was playing with, what religion they were, ethnicity, socioeconomic class, we all wanted that one thing, and that was to win in basketball. And you had to come together as a team collectively in order to win and be successful. And the same thing goes for global diplomacy. You have that negotiation as far as give and take. And if you're the star on a team, you can't take all the shots. You got to pass the ball. You have to understand the nuance of basketball as far as who is hot, who's not. How do I set the table for my teammates? How do I make someone successful? The same thing goes globally with diplomacy. You have to understand your opponent, your team. How do I set people up for success? What am I going to do in order to make that happen? You also look at, we refer a lot in basketball, time, situation, and score. There's a time, a situation, and a score for an appropriate play. If we're in the first quarter and we're up 10 points, that's an appropriate time, situation, and score to maybe experiment and do a riskier play, half-court lob. If it's in the fourth quarter, we're down by 4 points, 30 seconds, that is not the appropriate time, situation, or score to throw the lob. If you do try that, you're gonna find yourself on the bench. Well, the same thing goes in global diplomacy. There's a time if you have more leverage to ask for certain things, but if you don't have that leverage, maybe it's not that time. And so in diplomacy, you don't wanna ask for too much, that's bad, or give away too much, that could be bad as well. So those type of negotiations, and again, that's what I love about sports, is it translates to other areas of the world, and everybody has a scouting report, and we use those on the court to figure out how we're going to compete against our opponent. You have to have a good advanced team to scout for the team, and then the communication that you have, that's gonna determine whether or not you win the game. Same thing on the diplomatic side. You have your analysts to really delve into your opposition, understanding that. But at the end of the day, sports breaks down those barriers that you have because you have your love of the game, we're playing sports, and you develop those relationships. And within those relationships, if there's a crisis, you can lean on those relationships in order to come to a resolution, a solution with your allies, or even to figure out how you're gonna contend with your enemies. And so those same sorts of things with sports transcend really all areas, and they translate to other areas as well, and it lends itself to global diplomacy.
Well, you just set Dan up perfectly. Great pass.
That's what I'm here for.
So on that note, Dan, many might not know that Sports Diplomacy Unit was started and established after 9/11 to reach out to young people in the Middle East through soccer. The Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs at the State Department leads many of the cultural exchange programs, from the sports diplomacy to Fulbright to the International Visitors Leadership Program, to advance our interests. So can you tell us about a recent public diplomacy success that you feel was achieved by the State Department in one of these programs? And how do investments in cultural and educational programs help advance what we've been talking about all morning, national and economic security?
So I'm guessing most people have heard of Fulbright or the IVLP program. I'm seeing some nods. The program on my team that we run is the Sports Envoy program. Lesser known, but I think as important. And what we do 25 times a year is we send former professional athletes, like Steven, overseas, usually pair him up with a female athlete, and we run sports programming overseas to have some of those conversations about gender equality, socioeconomic differences, whatever the issue may be. Usually they're picked by the embassy to actually be tailored to what the community needs. And we use sports as a convening power to have those conversations around a game. Really excited you're going to Sri Lanka Thursday?
Yes.
Yeah.
I need to pack.
Take your sneakers.
It's not all basketball though. We ran a surfing camp in Colombia, a flag football camp in Brazil. We just wrapped up a wheelchair basketball camp in Saudi Arabia. So we go to some of these places around the world where conversations are tougher, and we use sports to have them. My favorite story happened in Brunei a year ago. Until June of 2023, women were not allowed to play sports in Brunei. We sent 2 World Cup champions to Brunei, Laurie Fair and Amy Griffin, to have that conversation and use sports to open doors. And there are some fantastic stories that came out of that week-long program in Brunei. But at the end of the camp, they had a public display of women playing sports, and the government said, you know what? We should allow women to play sports. And that's the power
a big clap.
Yeah. That's the soft power we're talking about, and how diplomacy can change the world using sports. And so we didn't solve their problem. They have a long way to go, just like we have a long way to go with equity and equality in sports here in the United States. But we set them up to have a good chance.
Thank you. And again, what a fabulous example of success. So Jim, I'm going to turn to you because you have a little show and tell over here, I think. So Coca-Cola recently hosted the president of Kenya, and this was very significant. I think I heard it said earlier, the first time in 2 decades a head of state from the continent of Africa has come for a state dinner. And President William Ruto was at your global headquarters in Atlanta, where Coca-Cola announced a $175 million investment in Kenya over the next 5 years, and a new limited edition Coca-Cola can designed by a Kenyan artist, and Coca-Cola flavor as well. And so you've made these significant investments in Africa. Elaborate a little bit on the scale and nature of these investments and how they contribute both to the economic development of African countries and the impact they have locally, job creation, infrastructure development, but also how do they bring back to America's growth and America's global public image?
Yeah, you know, just listening to the discussion here, it strikes me that that everyone on the stage has their own role to play in how we do U.S. global diplomacy, right? So the Congresswoman is proposing ideas and hopefully funding them to improve the policies that lead to the State Department and the guys up here from the State Department to be able to go out and do their roles to show American values, to hopefully increase support for our values and our country. And then there's the role of the American multinational, right? 138 years Coca-Cola has been around. Started in a pharmacy on Marietta Street in downtown Atlanta to over 200 countries. We are a true American success story, right? So we have these iconic brands that we can show the world, hopefully refresh the world. They'll enjoy them and they'll come back for another one after they have the first one, right? But then also being able to extend our business to the broader world. So Dana raises the recent visit by President Ruto to the US. He came to our headquarters, which is a very proud moment for all of us that work at Coca-Cola. We made the announcement to invest $175 million over the course of the next 5 years in our operations in Kenya. We've been in Kenya for 75 years. We employ, as a system, more than 10,000 people. And we also work with over 500,000 micro and small and medium-sized companies distributing our products. So, we're touching a vast array of the economy of Kenya. And we really made that investment because we have faith in where the business environment is going in Kenya and in other parts of Africa as well. So this was a business decision based on the importance of how we see Africa in our company, particularly how we see Kenya. That will improve our facilities. It will bring more people into the company, hopefully, and it'll create more marketing opportunities. And one of those marketing opportunities is the can that Dana has in her hand. We're happy to say that we are marketing experts and innovators, and this is an example of it. So this is a new product just launched in Kenya in recent weeks. And the design of the can in particular is from a Kenyan artist, as Dana said. It's just another way for us to connect as business people to our consumers. And so we're doing that from the business perspective, but from the diplomacy perspective, our investment in that country and in the lives of those people that we can help influence is really a tremendous way of showing who we are as a country, who we are as a company, who we are as a country.
Well, I think it's been a fantastic panel and conversation, and we're going to wrap up with one final question, 1 minute each. And Jim, I'm going to start with you quickly. What makes you optimistic about America's global public diplomacy, besides this amazing artwork and launch of this gift?
Well, listen, I go back to President Ruto's visit, right? I mean, the connection that companies like ours can have in individual countries across the world, meeting with leaders, not just elected officials, but up-and-coming leaders in the country and the everyday populace is very important. And shows who we are as a company, as I said, and who we are as a country. Listen, we have iconic moments throughout the 138 years of the Coca-Cola Company. We marched behind the Allies after D-Day, coming up on the 80th year, to bring refreshment to the troops and to others. We taught the world to sing, right? I mean, there is no better example of American soft power than a can of Coca-Cola in your hand, and we're very proud of that.
Thank you. Stephen? Give me a good success or optimistic for the future story.
Well, my intrusive thoughts makes me want to have a Kanye moment and just say me. But I'm just kidding. But for me, it's just, being a part of a panel like this and listening to everyone speak and seeing and hearing all the selfless acts of service. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm a child of educators, and there's no one more selfless than, our educators and our teachers. But being able to be a part of this and when I go to these various countries and visit these places and see the positive effects that we have, like when we're in Palestine, working in the West Bank with camps and seeing these kids work and play together and being able to play basketball. And I remember there was a young lady that you could tell had never played basketball before, and she was in a skirt and some flats, did not have the nice kicks, but you couldn't tell any difference. She was just out there having fun and playing basketball with her new friends. And that's what sports creates. It creates new friends, it creates new relationships, it breaks down those barriers, and with that, we can just hope to create a new world where everyone can, play ball together and win at the same time.
That sounds great. Congresswoman, and then Dan, 1 minute between you. What makes you optimistic about the future?
Well, I guess I'll have a Kim Kardashian moment and say, Stephen, I don't know.
This panel's getting away from me.
No, the power of development, dialogue, and diplomacy. So development. World Cup is getting ready to happen. You know, half of the African countries that are participating in qualifying events don't have the venues available to them to have their athletes participate. So they have to go someplace else. Great opportunity for development and infrastructure to happen. Dialogue. Raw circumstances, the stories behind some of these athletes that make it. Some of the highest paid athletes here in the United States are foreign born. So why not use the juggernaut that comes from marketing gurus like Coca-Cola and other companies to help share those stories of what it took for them to get to that team where they're playing in now. In-country ambassadors, to allow us an opportunity to learn more about those countries and how we can help. And then diplomacy. I was in Japan a month ago or 2 months ago with the State Department, and doors got reopened that had been closed because I brought with me Hello Kitty Dodger gifts.
There you go.
The power of Shohei Ohtani allowed us to go back to tables and talk to defense ministers and foreign ministers about women, peace, and security issues that are incredibly important to both countries.
Power of the brand. All right, Dan.
Really quick.
Be my winner today. 20 seconds. Most optimistic.
20 seconds. Wow. It's the youth in America that are engaged in sports, and it's the future that they are going to give the sports landscape, coupled with this great decade of opportunity ahead of us. And the US government is going to push for accessibility around youth sports. And I'll leave you with this. If you didn't know, the US government has set a mark of increasing youth participation in sports to 63% by 2030. We can't do it alone. We need great partners to help us get there, but it's youth that give me great hope.
Thank you all. And thank you, everyone. Stephen will be with us tomorrow on the Hill, so we're going to head off, and thank you for your time.
Excellent.